I'd like to welcome everyone again, and I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Jyun-Yi Lee, Associate Research Fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research in Taiwan, specializing in security issues, hybrid threats, gray zone conflicts, small states, foreign and security policy in Europe, and providing commentary and expertise on a wide variety of other security and international relations related topics. And well, without further interruption, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Lee and to go on with the lecture.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be here sharing with you some of my observations regarding China's foreign policy and the current China-Taiwan relations. So I'm sharing my slides here. Can all of you see my slides?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So to begin with, I would like to say something about the disclaimer. So I'm from Taiwan, and it may appear strange for a Taiwanese to talk about China's foreign policy and Taiwan-China relations. But I think this is because Taiwan and China share pretty much the same culture or cultural heritage, and we basically speak the same language, although the written forms are slightly different. And because of the complex historical relations, we basically share the same historiography and also curriculum. So for all these reasons, we think people of Taiwan know how Chinese people think quite profoundly. So we know the enemy. We know our enemy. We know how Chinese people think and how they behave. But of course, China is an adversary, at least in the military domain. So my presentation, I think, will be slightly critical of China's own narrative and understanding. So I don't claim impartiality or neutrality in my presentation. Today, I prepared quite a few slides, and they are organized into 4 sections, but we probably won't have enough time to go through each of this. So I would like to first give you a brief account of China's foreign policy, and then talk a little bit about the complex history between Taiwan and China, and then assessment of Chinese objective in Taiwan and how dire, how dangerous the situation is around the Taiwan Strait, and then some of Taiwan's responses. Now, when we look at China's foreign policy, my plan today is not to begin with some textbook analysis of China's behavior or China's foreign policy. So instead, I try to pick up an example and from there to deduce some of the Chinese, some of the features in Chinese foreign policy or Chinese foreign behavior. If we look at China's foreign ministry's website, and in the foreign policy section, there are several documents. And one of the latest one is called Joint Statement by the PRC and the Russian Federation on Global Strategic Stability. If you bear with me to have a look at the text or some of the quotations here, I think actually those citations or quotations here contain some features, some long-running features in China's foreign behavior or foreign policy. In the preamble of the text, both China and Russia claims that they emphasize the importance of maintaining and strengthening global strategic stability. More importantly, they emphasize that currently the world is having serious challenges. So from here, I think if we translate this paragraph into using Chinese leader Xi Jinping's words, then basically this paragraph says that today we are in the midst, the world is in the midst of great change, not been seen in a century. So what this means is that the world order is changing, and there are challenges and also opportunities for China. So this indicates a need for China to engage in struggle. Okay? Struggle is a particular word in the Communist Party's language. I'll explain that later. And the second quotation I take from the text is that both China and Russia emphasize that the destinies of the peoples of all countries are interrelated. China and their states and their associations should not seek to ensure their own security at the expense and to the detriment of the security of other states. Now, this may sound familiar. It represents Xi Jinping's idea of comprehensive security, or the idea that security is indivisible. But I think at a more abstract level, this reflects an idealist rhetoric representing the universal values. So basically, in every Chinese text about foreign policy or foreign relations, there contains some description of the ideal international order or international politics. And now, as I will also explain later, China now tries to represent the universal values. So it no longer claims that the Chinese culture or Chinese systems is unique. It now tries to contend that the universal values and principles are open to contestation, and China, together with its partners like Russia, can represent and can defend the order and the universal values. The third quotation I take from the text is that both sides claim that the importance of maintaining constructive relations between major powers is important. So there's an emphasis on major powers. And I think this also reflects the third feature of Chinese foreign policy, which is a materialist worldview. So Chinese people basically accept that international order is ultimately a product of great power competition. So, in other words, might decides or might determines right. And so, in its foreign behavior, China is more interested in engaging with major powers, as if a deal is struck between the great powers, then the other smaller powers will not have an issue with that, or they will not have any power to overwrite the deals by the great powers. And finally, the text also made an explicit accusation of the US. So it contends that not all of the 5 nuclear weapon states follow such approaches in practice. The ideal practice envisioned by China and Russia. And so here, the target obviously is the US or the West in general. So in contemporary China's foreign policy, the US or the West functions as the other to the Chinese or China-centered worldview. And if we pushed China, if we press China hard enough, then they would say basically what they are doing is defensive. So if we accuse China of weaponizing its domestic law, for instance, then the typical Chinese response would be that the US did that first. The US, for instance, interferes in China's internal affairs by its Taiwan Relations Act. So it is an example of long-arm jurisdiction. So this is a typical Chinese response. So if we look at these four elements more closely on the first element on struggle, I think here the Chinese thinking still reflects the Marxist the Marxist worldview that there are several laws and regularities in the social world. And so Chinese people like to talk about historical trends, like the quote here. The quote is about the US tariff wars. But again, Xi Jinping tends to argue that there are some historical trends or some laws of economics. And so obviously he was hinting that currently the US is not following the regularities or the laws of the social world. So by historical trends, more often than not, China refers to the following two. That is, the world is moving towards multipolarity. So contemporary Chinese government also promotes the idea of the democratization of international relations, meaning not only the US and China, but also other major powers or more regional powers should come to play a role in international relations. And the second is economic globalization, from which China benefits most. So in China's thinking, there are laws, there are historical trends, but history or historical progress is made through struggles between two opposite forces. So in China's thinking, there is a binary dichotomy of the East versus the West, of China versus the US, or the good versus the evil. And of course, it won't be surprising to know that China always positions itself as a force of good, as a guardian of order and stability. And nowadays, it even champions itself as the guardian of the United Nations based international order. And so consequently, the US and its allies and partners are conceptualized as saboteurs and disruptors in current international politics. The second element, the idealist rhetoric, I think is important and shouldn't be underestimated. In Chinese historical education and in China's popular culture, there's a running theme that is a century of humiliation. And as reflected in the picture here, the picture was made at the turn of 19th and 20th century, when China, or when the imperialist China was under foreign invasion. So the Chinese intellectual at the turn of the century made this picture. They used animals to describe different countries. So you may see that the frog here represents France, and the leopard represents Germany, and the snake to the right describes Japan. And Russia, of course, is represented by the bear. Okay, so it means that China in the 19th century was humiliated by those foreign powers. And so the implication is that there is a need for China to engage or to initiate a nation building and state building project to become or to resume its great power status once again. So this nation and state building project is still ongoing, as reflected in the emphasis on modernization. So if we pay attention to any Communist Party's text about Chinese foreign relations, about China's political achievements, and so on and so forth, we will come across the term modernization very often. So modernization has been taken as an achievement under the Communist Party's rule. But there's still a difference between different governments or different administrations. So for the Chinese Communist Party before Xi Jinping, so under leaders like Hu Jintao, like Jiang Zemin and Deng Xiaoping, the sources for the Communist Party's legitimacy basically were social and economic achievements. So in the literature, people tend to use a metaphor that is that Communist Party signed a social contract with the Chinese people. So the Communist Party promised to offer social and economic welfare to the people. In return, the Chinese people give in their loyalty and their political obedience. So social and economic achievements have been critical sources for the Communist Party to maintain its legitimacy and to maintain its status in China. But when or after Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, China's economy has been slowing down. So gradually, the Communist Party finds that it is becoming more and more difficult to rest the party's legitimacy on social and economic performance. So in recent years, Xi Jinping turned to nationalism and patriotism to sustain its support from the public. So again, when it comes to concrete political issues like Taiwan-China relations, like China-Japan relations, or South China Sea disputes, nowadays the elements of Chinese nationalism and patriotism are encouraged and sometimes mobilized by the Chinese government. And of course, from here, military strength has not been taken as a symbol of national pride. But I would also suggest that the nation and state building project, while seeks to achieve or to restore China's great power status, it is insufficient to submit that China had been weak or had been weaker than the Western powers in basically every domain. So one of the implications of the phrase the humiliation of a century's humiliation was that there is a psychological need for China to find something positive, to find something that can be used to claim that China or the Chinese nation remains superior to the Western nations. So the nation and state building projects turns to the past. So Chinese intellectuals since the end of 19th century engaged in history and rediscovered the importance of Chinese culture. So the argument goes like this. At the turn of the 19th and 20th century, China might be weak in terms of its military strength. And that is why the country was invaded and bullied by the Western powers. But the Chinese culture remains unique and remains superior to the Western culture. So this is a crucial element in China's nation building project. So even today, if we pay attention to Chinese pop culture, we still can see several stereotypes in Chinese popular cultural products. So people would dress in a typical form or typical forms, and they will use particular cultural decorations or customs and so on and so forth. And a political example would be Confucius Institute. I assume that you must have heard the Confucius Institute, right? But have you ever questioned about why the institutes were named in this way? Why not Chinese Institute? I think this is because Confucius occupies a peculiar position in Chinese philosophy and in Chinese education. So instead of using Chinese Institute, the term Confucius Institute may sound more historical, more unique, and more different from other names or other terms. Now, what happened under Xi Jinping's rule is that before Xi Jinping came to power, the elements of Chinese culture had been used to claim that the Chinese culture is unique, is different, and hence the Western systems, Western values like democracy could not be applied to China. Okay, so in the 1990s, for instance, in East Asia, there had been a debate about Asian values. Basically, the debate was about whether the successful stories of Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, and Singapore can be applied to other places, or whether the Chinese societies like Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China can embrace the Western democracy or democratic systems. So at that time, the Chinese culture was used to argue that the Chinese society, the Chinese culture is different, so that Western democracy, rule of law, and other values are not or could not be applied to China. Okay, so this is a particularistic view, but when or after Xi Jinping came to power, something changed. Now, there's a shift from claiming that the Chinese culture is unique to the claim that Chinese culture, while maybe unique, nevertheless can be applied to other places, to other systems. So there's a trend from the particular to the universal. So for instance, in Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, in his Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, and Global Civilization Initiative, in these four grand projects, there's a reference to Chinese wisdom, as if these four projects or four initiatives contain Chinese wisdom and Chinese lessons that can be copied, that can be learned by others. And the now infamous Russia-China joint statement, in this text, there's also statements like this: both China and Russia call on all states to protect the United Nations-driven international architecture. And somewhere else, somewhere in the text, both sides also claim that both China and Russia are countries having long-standing traditions of democracy. This is a relatively new development. So it means that now China and also Russia are confident enough to compete against other Western countries, the US and other European powers, about the meaning of the international order, about the meaning of democracy. So contemporary China no longer denies that democracy cannot or can be used in China, but they try to reinterpret or try to give democracy an entirely different meaning. Okay, so I think from here there is a paradigm shift, so to speak, in Chinese foreign policy thinking. So China becomes more confident and tries to present itself as protecting and representing the universal values. And the third element is about the materialist worldview. And I think this is evident basically in every Chinese academic or scholarly writing about international relations. In basically all of these writings, they will begin with a paragraph or a discussion about the nature of the international order. So basically, the Chinese scholars would argue that the international order reflects the distribution of power, especially amongst the great powers. And so the implication is that as China grows stronger, both economically and militarily, China should reassert its rightful place in the world. And so Xi Jinping's notions like the Chinese dream and the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation are commonly referred to in those academic texts. And again, in practice, China's foreign policy becomes increasingly assertive, and there is a positive association between Chinese foreign policy goals and its material power. So, and as we will see later, China's list of national core interests keeps expanding, and that reflects its confidence as its material power grows. So nowadays, not only Taiwan, but also Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, the Senkaku Islands, South China Sea, even cybersecurity, human rights issues, and so on and so forth are deemed as Chinese or China's core interests, meaning there are issues that China cannot compromise. And the box to the right is one of my favorite examples. Major General Qiao Liang is known for his co-authored book, Unrestricted Warfare, in the early 2000s. This book was taken as the Chinese version of hybrid warfare. So General Qiao Liang has long been taken as a hawkish figure within Chinese military, within the PLA. But it is interesting to see General Qiao to argue in 2020 that the Taiwan issue can only be resolved through the use of force. But he warned against his fellow countrymen that the Taiwan question is not simply a matter between China and Taiwan. The U.S. explicit demonstrates an attempt to intervene in the Taiwan issue, and most importantly, the U.S. has the power to do so. So General Qiao, while being a hawkish general, nevertheless warned that the Taiwan question should be taken as part of the struggle between the US and China. So the metaphor he used is this US-China arm wrestling. So until the U.S.-China competition came to an end, the Taiwan question cannot be resolved fundamentally. So this is a surprising perspective, because one would assume that General Chow would say that China should take whatever means necessary to take back Taiwan. But in the contrary, he cautioned the use of force against Taiwan, basing on the argument that it is also a matter of US-China competition, and that the US has the willingness and the strength to stop or to hinder China from achieving its political goal. So I think this reflects nicely the materialist worldview. So the US is taken as the hegemon, and it is the object to be challenged and to be replaced. But at the time being, the US is still the existing hegemon. And so China acknowledges this painful fact. And so the above discussion all points to the need for China to find an other to be opposed and arguably to learn from. And so in the literature, I think this US scholar, Rushi Doshi, captures China's contemporary strategy very, very nicely. So China no doubt tries to replace the US status in the world. And its strategy basically is to replace, or is to learn from the US and to replace the US forms of power. So Doshi put forth a three-step strategy to describe China's foreign policy logic. The first step is blunting. That is to blunt the hegemon's exercise or forms of control. And the second is to build China's own forms of control over other countries. And the third is to expand or to attract other countries to support China's idea. My own research on China's writing on the gray zone also points to the same direction. You probably know that the idea of the gray zone, right? So the gray zone basically is a concept developed by the US to describe the behavior of other countries, other revisionist countries. And in the Chinese literature, there is an attempt to normalize or to neutralize gray zone operations. So the argument goes like this. Chinese scholars find from Michael Mazar's work a reference to different categories of revisionist states. So basically, Michael Mazar, who is a leading figure in developing the idea of the gray zone, argues that it is the revisionist power that have the motive to use gray zone operations. Because if a country is revolutionary, if a country is so dissatisfactory about the current international order, then it will try to overthrow the entire order. So it is only the revisionist, those countries that benefit from most of the order but want to revise some parts of it, that will use gray zone operations to revise the international order. What is interesting is that Michael Mazar mentions in his writing that both the US and China could be called revisionist. But Mazar himself doesn't elaborate on this issue. It is the Chinese scholars who take up this distinction and claim that since both China and the US are revisionist, they should it is natural for them to use gray zone operations to modify the current international order. So I think this reflects what I referred to as whataboutism moments ago. So when people now accuse China of using salami slicing tactics to alter the status quo on the ground, I mean, in South China Sea, in the Taiwan Strait, in the Senkaku Islands, and so on and so forth, the typical response would be that, yeah, but it is the US that use gray zone operations in the first place. So this is what Michael Mazar basically was saying. And I think the table here tries to depict the fact that while China criticized the US of, for instance, conducting the freedom of navigation operations, the FONOPs, even if China criticized the US of tightening security relations with allies and partners, and so on and so forth, China does exactly the same. So on the freedom of navigation operations, China conducted live fire naval drills in waters between Australia and New Zealand in February this year. And when China made a case of the US tightening its security relations with Philippines, with Japan, and even with Taiwan, it in fact seeks to enhance its relations with Russia by holding joint patrol exercises regularly. And when China criticized that the US deploys its forces in East Asia, it too does long distance trainings, even to the second island chain. And also it has conducted several rounds of large scale military drills around Taiwan. And when China criticizes the US of internationalizing the South China Sea and Taiwan issues, it in turn tries to internalize those issues by, for instance, issuing the so-called 10-dash lines and claim that the majority of the South China Sea belongs to China. And also it tries to internalize the Taiwan issue and quote that the Taiwan Strait is not international waters. And also there's a narrative warfare. And this is a lesson China learned from the war in Ukraine, or the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It criticized that the US or the West marginalized Russia's perspective and engaged in the so-called narrative warfare. But in turn, China develops its own narrative as reflected in the three global initiatives. So I think this table tries to depict the strategy of blunting. China actually is learning from the US and trying to challenge the US by using exactly the same tactics. Okay, so so far we concluded the first part on the Chinese foreign policy. I think the basic idea is that if we look at Chinese behavior and Chinese text or the leader's speech, usually we'll find that there's a problem of double standard. China tries to say one thing while does exactly the opposite. And the discussion above tries to rationalize this by putting China in the context of modernization, by putting it in the context of nation and state building. So there's a need for China to assert its uniqueness. But of course, when it comes to politics, when it comes to international relations, China's behavior is fundamentally rational and realist. So it accepts a materialist perspective about the international order and tries to change or try to revise it through the gray zone or hybrid threats tactics. The second part, I think, will be a little bit complicated because it is about Taiwan-China relations. I think first we need to dig into to history. So this may sound a little bit complicated, but please bear with me. When it comes to Taiwan-China relations, we need to go back to the history, or back to the late 19th century. So Taiwan, being an island off the Chinese coast, only entered the Chinese world occasionally in history. But in late 19th century, Taiwan was formally incorporated by the Imperial China. But in 1985, there was a war between Japan and the Imperial China, and Japan won, and so as a result, Taiwan was ceded to Japan after the war. So for the next 50 years, between 1985 to 1945, Taiwan was a colony of Japan. But what's happening was that in 1911, the Republic of China overthrew the Imperial China and established a modern country called the Republic of China. But remember, at that time, in 1911, Taiwan was a part of Japan, okay, and had nothing to do with the ROC. And in 1945, Taiwan was recovered by the Republic of China after the Second World War. The Second World War ended much later in East Asia than in the European theater. So in this part of the world, for us, the Second World War ended only in 1945. So in 1945, Japan was defeated and was forced to return Taiwan without claiming whom Taiwan was returned to. But the Republic of China seized this opportunity and claimed that Taiwan now was returned to the Chinese state. But unfortunately, after the end of the Second World War, China soon entered into a period of civil war. So the picture here depicts that by 1947, the Communist Party already occupied the northeastern part of China. And by 1949, the Communist Party basically ruled the vast part of China. And consequently, the nationalist government, the Republic of China, was forced to retreat to Taiwan. Okay, so in 1949, or I should say, since 1949, Taiwan was under the rule of the Republic of China, while the mainland China was occupied and ruled by the Communist or by the People's Republic of China. So initially, the United States was not interested in intervening the Chinese Civil War. It wasn't interested in siding or supporting the Republic of China. even though the ROC fought with the US during the Second World War. But the breakout of the Korean War changed the US decision. So since the 1950s, the US supported the Republic of China in Taiwan, and it supports the ROC's claim that the ROC actually represents the whole China. So between 1950 to 1971, the People's Republic of China, as we know it today, was marginalized, was excluded from the United Nations. And it was the Republic of China, or actually it was Taiwan, that claimed that it represents the whole China. And it is a member of the United Nations and a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. But the situation became unbearable because it didn't make sense that the majority of the Chinese people were marginalized by the United Nations. So in 1971, the United States decided to change its stance. So firstly, in 1971, there was a UN resolution 2758 deciding that it was the PRC, not the ROC, that represents China, that is the legitimate government of China. And in 1979, the US further shifted its diplomatic recognition from the ROC to the PRC. So nowadays, the US, from the US perspective, it recognized the PRC as the sole, as the legitimate government representing the whole China. But in the meantime, the US Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act and forced the US executive or the US government to support Taiwan in terms of its security and defense. So I think the current Taiwan-China relations have been fixed ever since the late 1970s. But what happened next is Taiwan's own democratization. So in 1987, the government in Taiwan decided to lift the martial law. And then a few years later, in 1991, the Taiwanese government decided that it no longer saw the CCP as a rebel group. It now recognized the PRC as an equal political regime. So we no longer see ourselves engaging in a civil war against the communists. And in 1996, Taiwan held a first direct presidential election. And so since 1996, we claimed that the sovereignty of the country now rests on the people because the government is now formed by people's direct vote. So when it comes to Taiwan-China relations, I think the first account or the first perspective is a civil war perspective. And this remains China or the PRC's official position. But interestingly, the PRC's positions on Taiwan are not consistent. In the 1930s, for instance, Chairman Mao Zedong once supported Taiwan independence. Okay, so when Taiwan was under Japan's colonial rule, the communist leader, Chairman Mao, did not see Taiwan or the Taiwanese people as part of the Chinese nation. He instead saw the Taiwanese people as an as another nation or another people, just like the Koreans. So in the 1930s, Chairman Mao supported Taiwan independence and also Koreans' independence. And in 1941, China's Premier Zhou also suggested that China support Taiwan's independence or Taiwan's liberation movement. But since 1942, the CCP changed its stance on Taiwan. So since then, Taiwan has been taken as an inalienable part or a renegade province of China. And so since the 1940s, Taiwan has become a symbol for Chinese nationalism. And if you remember that moments ago, I suggested that nowadays Chinese nationalism and patriotism are the important sources for the Communist Party to claim its legitimacy. Taiwan has become a more pressing and important issue for the Chinese Communist Party because taking back Taiwan, either by force or by other means, will enhance the Communist Party's legitimacy, not to mention Xi Jinping's personal legacy. Before we move on, I think it is important to remind you the difference between China's One China principle and the US and many other countries' One China policy. The terminology here is important. For China, the correct term is One China principle. And the principle consists of three parts. The first is that there is only one China, one Chinese state. And second, the government of the People's Republic of China represents the whole or is the sole legitimate government of China. And then Taiwan is part of China. This is China's official stance. On the contrary, the US developed its own One China policy. It doesn't fully accept China's position. It only says that it recognizes the PRC's claim that the PRC is the legal government of China. But it only acknowledges Chinese position that Taiwan is part of China. Okay, so the US One China policy admits that the PRC has the legitimacy to rule the Chinese state, but it doesn't say that it fully accepts the claim that China owns Taiwan. And in international politics, many other countries developed their own One China policy. So some countries acknowledge China's position. Some country respects China's position, and some countries only say that it recognized the PRC and it established diplomatic relations with China without mentioning the part on Taiwan. So there are many versions of One China policy, but I think it is crucial that China's position is different from the US and many other countries' position when it comes to Taiwan-China relations. And this table summarizes China's claim of its national core interest. I think in part, this reflects that as China grows militarily and economically, it becomes more confident. And so a confident China consequently claims that more and more issues belong to its national core interest. So initially, when the idea of national core interest first appeared in Chinese official documents, it was Taiwan that was listed. In 2006, Tibet was added as part of China's national core interest. And in 2006, later on, Xinjiang was also mentioned. And in 2009, then the state councillor Dai Bingbo put forth several principles to suggest the scope and content of China's national core interest. So the principles are more abstract and general. But later on, as you can see, South China Sea or the Senkaku Islands, which is an island contested by China and Japan and Taiwan, to be part of China's core interest. And so then in 2015, in China's national security law, China lists its own regime or its regime security, its sovereignty, its internal unity, its territorial integrity, its welfare, its political system, and so on and so forth as its national core interest. So the idea of national core interest is that this is something, or these are the issues that China will not concede, that China cannot compromise. Okay, so the growing list also suggests the growing Chinese nationalism and its confidence with its own material strengths. But even though China still adopts a civil war and Cold War perspective, things have been changed in Taiwan. As I mentioned before, in 1996, we held the first direct election, electing our president. So since then, the sovereignty of the Republic of China was rested in the people, or rested on the people. So it is now a concept of popular sovereignty, people deciding the formation of their own governments and people deciding their own fate. So even though the ROC constitution was maintained, even though the constitution remains intact, to the point that officially, this is a little bit strange, but officially, we still claim a sovereignty over the whole China, even including Mongolia. Okay, this is the constitution written in the 1920s and rectified in 1930s. Taiwan was forced to keep this constitution, partly because we are still a divided society. People still have different views and different identities, and partly because any attempt to revise or to amend the constitution would be perceived by China and the United States as changing or altering the status quo. So it has been a political taboo for Taiwan or any Taiwanese government to try to amend its constitution. So we keep this strange, surreal constitution. But in everyday politics, the exercise of popular sovereignty generates a sense that it is the people and the people of Taiwan, is the people of Taiwan and the people of Taiwan only that forms a political community. So a sense of Taiwan itself being a country has been developing. So put together, I think there is a mismatch between the ROC's de jure jurisdiction and de facto sovereignty. So constitutionally, we claim to rule over the whole China. But in fact, the government of Taiwan only rules the island of Taiwan and several outlying islands. So the picture here is our passport. And this passport is very interesting and still cause trouble for us because here the first line in Mandarin Chinese says that the name of the country is the Republic of China. And the symbol in the middle, there's a phrase called the Republic of China in English. And then in the bottom of the passport, the name Taiwan is there. So Taiwan instead of the ROC was highlighted. So this passport created problems for us. For instance, when I visited Germany last week, I was stopped by the officials there because they asked, why is it that your passport indicates that you are from Taiwan, but exactly the same passport also says that it is Republic of China. So actually, who are you? Are you China or are you Chinese or Taiwanese? So nowadays, we still encounter problems or trouble like this, and it takes time to explain the complex history between Taiwan and China. So my point is that although China still adopts a Civil War and Cold War perspective, we no longer see in this light. So we now see ourselves as an independent and de facto country with 11 diplomatic allies. And in Taiwan, the identity politics is also evolving. And so nowadays, currently, when it comes to political identity, meaning do we support unification with China or should we seek independence of China? The majority of the population indicates or prefers maintaining the status quo. So about 60%, more than 60% of the population supports maintaining the status quo. Although here the status quo can still be further divided into maintaining the status quo forever, maintaining the status quo now, independence later, or maintaining the status quo now and unify with China later. So there are different questions, but in general, people support the idea of maintaining the status quo. But gradually, more and more people come to support the idea of Taiwan independence, or that we are already an independent country. And then when it comes to cultural identity, meaning who do we think we are? Are we Taiwanese? Are we Chinese? Or are we both? The trend has been that more and more people come to identify themselves as Taiwanese only, but about 1/3 of the population still identifies themselves as both Taiwanese and Chinese. So this somewhat divided society also offers space for China to intervene in our domestic politics and to infiltrate our society and our political system. But when it comes to Taiwan-China relations, I must also emphasize that the Cold War and Civil War perspective is not the only one theory, or is not the only one perspective. We should also put the issue in a broader geopolitical context. And so here, the famous book by Graham Allison in 2017 depicts the idea that when a country is rising, this usually, but not always, will threaten the existing power, the existing hegemon. And so for the hegemon to maintain its power and influence, it usually will try to contain the rising power. And so this great power rivalry in history usually ended violently. So 12 out of 16 cases resulted in war. So basically, Professor Ellison tries to say that as China is rising and China is now threatening the status of the US, it is very, very likely that the US and China will have some armed conflict. And here, Taiwan is taken to be a likely issue for China and the US to confront militarily. So, according to this perspective, the issue of Taiwan-China relations should be placed within a broader context of US-China competition. So Taiwan not only is an issue in Chinese nationalism, but is also a key for the US to maintain its primacy and its prestige in the Indo-Pacific. So peace and security in the Taiwan Strait is taken as a litmus test for the US to maintain its status and power in the region, if not globally. So if we put the US-China competition in a geopolitical perspective, then we would argue that Taiwan is very important because it lies at the central position of the first island chain, the red line in this picture. So, and the importance of the first island chain is that it contains China's naval development. So, for China to become a great power, it has to become a naval great power as well. And so, China needs to break through the first island chain that consists of Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and some of the Southeast Asian countries. So, excuse me. So, this is the geopolitical significance of Taiwan, and from here, the implication is that there's very motive for the U.S. to support Taiwan militarily, because if Taiwan is taken by the U.S., sorry, by China, then China can enter the Pacific Ocean freely. And this ultimately will challenge the US and endanger the US homeland security, because if China breaks through the first island chain, then basically there's not much in the second island chain, the blue line here. And so when China moves further eastwards, then that is the western coast of the United States. So from our perspective, the importance of Taiwan is not only because Taiwan has become a democratic country, but also its role in geopolitics. And here, the picture to the right depicts China's incursion into Taiwan's airspace and the maritime boundary. And it also depicts how China changes its course of its long-distance exercises or training when its military strength becomes stronger. So initially, when China first conducted its long-distance training, it took the orange line here between Taiwan and China. So the PLA entered the Pacific Ocean by taking the orange route. And this is simple because it only involves Taiwan and Japan. And at that time, neither Taiwan nor Japan wanted or had the reason to stop China. So this was the first route. And gradually, when China became militarily stronger, uh, the route has been more complicated. So it became, for instance, the blue route depicts how the PLA, the Chinese military now can somehow encircle Taiwan. And the red line here indicates how China can pass the sea between Japan and South Korea to enter the northern part of the Pacific Ocean. So with China's military strength growing, it now can take various routes to conduct its long distance training. And this obviously puts more strategic pressure on Taiwan and the regional countries. So when it comes to Taiwan-China relations, I try to offer three different perspectives. The first is Cold War, a Civil War and Cold War perspective. And from this perspective, the implication is that tension between Taiwan and China is a matter for the two involved. So both Taiwan and China should engage in de-escalation and maintain a stable global supply chain. So in other words, if we take this Civil War and Cold War perspective, then it is Taiwan's and China's responsibility to manage peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait area. But if we take the nationalist perspective, that is, China is pursuing national unification because there's a need for China to become modernized. There's a need for China to achieve its nation and state building. And that Taiwan is a symbol for China's rejuvenation or the Chinese dream, then the responsibility lies in China. Okay, so this is China's own responsibility to maintain peace and stability. And then finally, if we take a geopolitical perspective, then regional peace and security is a responsibility for both China and the US because it is a matter of great power competition. Okay, so from this perspective, Taiwan to a great extent can be exempt of its own responsibility. As long as we don't provoke, it is a matter of the competition between US and China. So in everyday politics or in regional politics here, different countries will take different perspectives to suit their interest. So for us, for the Chinese government, we obviously prefer the geopolitical perspective, while other countries may put responsibility on us by adopting a Civil War and Cold War perspective. But of course, for China, it prefers the Civil War perspective because then it can argue that Taiwan is a matter of China's internal affairs. And so other countries should not get involved or should not intervene. I know I'm running out of time, but my third part was try to explain China's objectives in Taiwan. And basically, when it comes to peace and security in the Taiwan Strait, the question basically takes two forms. The first is, will China invade Taiwan? That is, will China seek national unification by use of force? Or if this is not attainable, how will China achieve unification by means below the threshold of war? That is, by the gray zone operations or by hybrid threats. And in the following, I'll try to present our assessment. So first, the scenarios. According to China's own domestic law, that is the anti-succession law in 2005, China defines three conditions under which the so-called non-peaceful means could be justified. The first is successionist forces cause the fact of Taiwan's succession from China. The second is major incidents entailing Taiwan's succession to occur. And the third is possibilities for peaceful reunification are exhausted. So these are the three Chinese conditions. And as you can see, the conditions are deliberately vague and ambiguous, so that the Communist Party or the government in Beijing has the freedom to interpret whether Taiwan crosses the red line. And the table to the right is the analysis from the US. And the US generally maintains that there are 6 scenarios where China may use force against Taiwan. And number 1, 3, 4, and 6 are not likely given the current political situation in Taiwan. So actually, we need only to consider the following 2. That is, number 2, undefined moves toward formal independence. And so, but that is up to the Chinese government to determine whether any Taiwanese government's move constitutes formal independence. And the fifth is indefinite delays in the cross-strait dialogues or negotiation. So the fact that Taiwan refuses to accept China's precondition for negotiation can constitute an act of de facto independence in the eyes of the Chinese government. So these are the US or the American worries about conditions or scenarios where China may use force against Taiwan. But in practice, we generally discuss 3 factors to determine whether or how likely China can or may invade Taiwan. The first element is intention, and obviously we need to assume that Xi Jinping or the Chinese government has the intention to invade Taiwan. And the second element is capability. And so far, it goes without saying that the PLA is becoming stronger and stronger militarily. And so it is increasing its warfighting capability. But still, there are some limits of the PLA's capability. The first is that, Taiwan is an island. So to launch an invasion, China will need mobilize its military personnel, its weaponry, and the logistics. So to engage in an invasion, it requires mass mobilization. And under modern technology, we think that it is not likely that this kind of mass mobilization can go unnoticed. So it means that it is difficult for China to launch a surprise attack. After all, we're an island, so China needs to cross the Taiwan Strait. And secondly, for exactly the same reason, China also needs to develop its amphibious landing capability. But so far, the amphibious capability remains insufficient. So China, no doubt, is building a lot of warships, right? But the warships are meant to be used in confrontations against the US. So so far, the focus or the attention of the PLA is not on building amphibious landing vessels, for instance. And third, the Taiwanese military is quite confident that should China engage in a full-scale invasion, then its fleets are most vulnerable when crossing the strait. So that is the moment for us to fight back. And then the Taiwan Strait could be rough in terms of weather conditions and tidals. So that the weather conditions would limit the timing of invasion. Basically, we think spring and autumn would be more likely and more suitable for China to launch a large-scale military exercise or large-scale military maneuver. And finally, even if China develops its own amphibious landing capability, in Taiwan, there are only like a dozen or so beaches that are suitable for mass landing. And the majority of our coastal areas are rocky and not ideal for mass landing. So our military maintains that even though China is growing its warfighting capability, but so far, when it comes to amphibious landing, there are still limits on the part of the PLA's capability. And more importantly, we think that even if China has intention, even if China has the military capability, there are still some obstacles for China to execute its military invasion. The first is the possibility of U.S. interference. Any Chinese strategist must assume that the U.S. will intervene. And so this functions to deter China to some extent. And this is a debate currently not only in Taiwan, but also in the US and in many other countries. And from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think China also needs to consider the cost of international sanctions and the consequences. And this is also reflected in some of the Chinese academic writings. So Chinese scholars are worried that if they are isolated or if they are excluded, or if the US manage to contain China, then China may need to import its food and energy from the Eurasia continent. And so, and other problems include possible reaction from neighboring countries having territorial disputes with China. And here, India is the most important factor. You probably know that there are territorial disputes between China and India. So we have heard suggestion from retired Indian generals that Taiwan and India should, coordinate so that if there is a cross-strait contingency, then India could do something along its border with China to put pressure and to divert China's attention. And then the fourth obstacle considers the complexity of urban guerrilla warfare, and this is also a lesson. This is also a view from the Chinese scholars. They admit that urban warfare or urban guerrilla warfare remains the most complex form of warfare in human history, meaning the PLA doesn't have experience in this regard. And also, if a war against Taiwan prolongs, then there may be domestic social and economic pressure on the Communist Party, on the Chinese leader. So it is not in the Chinese leader's favor to engage in a long war against Taiwan. And finally, again, some Chinese scholars seriously ask the cost of invasion and the cost of conquering Taiwan. So they ask what to do if China, if the Chinese government rules Taiwan whose population live in anger and frustration, and how much cost China will pay. So taking together, we think that we still cannot rule out a full-scale invasion, but there are indeed several obstacles and several problems for China. So this leads us to our interim conclusion that instead of taking Taiwan by force, China may actually seek to take Taiwan by means other than war, that is, by gray zone operations or by hybrid threat tactics. In China's own words, it is the three warfares. Okay, the three warfares is a military doctrine developed by the PLA back in 2003. The three warfares consist of psychological warfare, public opinion warfare, and legal warfare. And together they form political warfare for the PLA. And so in the literature, scholars tend to see the three warfares not only as political warfare, but also as cognitive warfare developed by China. Because these three kinds of warfares are related to information domains and also non-kinetic means. So we think that it is more likely that China will seek to coerce Taiwan and force Taiwan to capitulate, as this report by the American Enterprise Institute suggested last year. And a study on Chinese writing and Chinese perspective also finds that hybrid warfare and hybrid threats now have entered China's or the PLA's lexicon. 2 years ago, the commander of China's Western Theater Command, General Wang, wrote in a newspaper that the so-called Ukraine crisis demonstrates a new form of hybrid war. And of course, here, hybrid war was launched by the US against Russia. Okay, so nowadays, the PLA generals think that hybrid warfare and hybrid threats may be the form of future armed conflict. So from here, I think there's no reason not to assume that if China accepts that future wars are hybrid in nature, then they are not taking the same strategy. So for us, the task is twofold. On the one hand, we need to increase our defense and our preparedness for the worst scenario, that is a full-scale invasion. But on the other hand, in our daily lives, in our daily politics, we also need to engage China in the gray zone or to confront China's hybrid threats. Okay, so this figure tries to depict some of the threats we have been confronting from China. So military domain, economic domain, political domain, social infrastructure, and information domain. Basically, in every domain, there are Chinese threats and also intimidation. And of course, we also pay close attention to see if China tries to engage in some sort of hybrid threats or hybrid warfare. But luckily, so far there's no concrete evidence suggesting that China is moving along that direction. I mean, uh, in April last year, in April 2 years ago, China did seem to engage in hybrid threats because in April, when our former president made a visit to the US, within 1 week, China launched a maritime gray zone operation and political coercion by sanctioning some of our politicians, and then a military drill, and also an economic coercion by punishing some of our agricultural products. And of course, this all came with information operation. So what happened 2 years ago came closest to the idea of hybrid threats as we know it. But those operations did not produce desirable effects or any significant impact on Taiwan because basically the people of Taiwan were not aware, or they were not they did not feel that Taiwan was really threatened by the PLA or by China. So I think even though we are facing these different kinds of threats, we are still preparing and to see. Well, we're still preparing and see if China really engages in anything similar to hybrid threats or hybrid warfare as we know it in Europe. So finally, our responses. The first is that, of course, in this part, we do learn a lot from your experiences. But to summarize, I think Taiwan's responses can be divided into 3 areas. The first is we try to gain international support. So we try to promote the idea that Taiwan will not yield and will not provoke. So we try to maintain the status quo. And we want to do this to earn trust from like-minded partners because we are concerned that if China accuses us of provocation, then some countries may buy this narrative. And so this will undermine their support for Taiwan. So this is our first principle. And then we have been engaging with the world through track 1.5 and track 2 diplomacy, trying to raise awareness of Chinese coercion, Chinese hybrid threats, and gray zone operations. And we also try to support the global supply chain restructuring. And you probably heard Taiwan produces the most advanced semiconductors or chips in the world. And so this is part of our strategy to increase our security. And the second kind of response considers our asymmetric capability and defense reform. That is, we must prepare for the worst scenario of full-scale Chinese invasion. And here, the theory of success is not to defeat China militarily because we don't have that kind of resources. Our theory of success is to foil the PLA's mission to successfully landing and occupying Taiwan. So currently, the idea is to have the decisive battles either in the Taiwan Strait or on the coastal areas. We try not to let the PLA to land on Taiwan and engage in urban warfare. So to do so, years ago, one of our former Joint Chief developed the idea of overall defense concept. This is not the official stance now, but it is highly influential. So we try to build up our force and also in addition to purchasing more conventional platforms like warships, tanks, fighter jets, and so on, we also have been developing our asymmetric capabilities, like those small mobile lethal and numerous weapons. And so the concept of operations includes first, if there's an invasion, then the first task is to preserve our force. And then we try to have the decisive battles in the littoral zone, and then to distract the enemy at the landing beach. That is the idea. But in the worst case, we are also preparing for urban warfare by developing this all-out defense reform. So nowadays, the government extended the compulsory military services from 4 months back to 1 year. This is arguably not enough, but this already took a lot of political capital to pass through the legislative branch. And also our military is divided into different sectors. So the main forces, which consist of voluntaries, will be responsible for combatant operations. And the reserve and other professional soldiers and the conscription members will be tasked to conduct territorial defense and also to serve in the reservists to support the previous two forces. And then we are just now developing the civil defense and trying to train more people to protect the critical infrastructure, to maintain peace and critical social functions in time of crisis. Okay, and finally, on the society, the current government launches a program of whole of society defense resilience. So resilience now becomes a key word in Taiwan's defense and security policy. And here we try to cooperate with different civil society groups. And so I think those civil society groups are responsible for raising awareness amongst the population and preparing the people or to enhance people's skills in disasters and war. And also the most important civil society groups here in Taiwan are responsible for countering disinformation together with the government. So I'll just stop here. Thank you. And see if you have any comments or questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. We understand that it's difficult to encompass something so complex and multifaceted as Chinese foreign policy in just one lecture. But in my opinion, it was quite brilliant and very interesting. So yeah, I can already see two hands among our participants. So Tatiana, please, your question.
So first of all, I really want to thank you for your lecture. It was really interesting and useful. And I have a few questions. And the first one is, how common is for people in Taiwan to read news from China? And if they do Taiwanese people read news from China directly in simplified characters? or are there specific platforms or media outlets that translate this content into traditional characters? And how strong an influence do these news have on public opinion in Taiwan?
Okay. Um, you know, the Taiwanese people use traditional forms, and the Chinese people use simplified forms. But currently, I think this is not an obstacle for China to promote its views and promote its ideas in the information domain, because number one, it is not very difficult for us to read simplified Chinese characters. And second, with modern technology, with AI, it is very easy for China or any Chinese program to translate the simplified forms into the traditional forms. So I think as part of China's united framework effort, China also deliberately provides different fonts of language when it comes to Taiwan. So I think this creates a problem for us because more and more people now can access Chinese information, Chinese news, or even Chinese cultural products. And so it becomes quite easy for China to promote both its own narrative and disinformation in Taiwan's information domain. So, and currently we do not have a very, at least from the government's perspective, we don't have a very effective official strategy to counter this because of the freedom of speech. So I think currently the government the government needs to work with civil society organizations to promote media literacy, to remind people that what you read on Chinese social media or even on Taiwan social media could be the information could be from China and could be reflecting China's own perspective. But it is difficult at this moment for us to measure how successful China's information operation is, and also how effective our countermeasures are.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, Anna, I can see your hand is the next, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for such a profound perspective and presentation. It was a lot of information, but I will try to digest it in the following days and weeks. Yeah, thank you one more time. I have a few questions, and I will start from maybe the question about key historical and cultural topics in humanities that are financed actually by China within academic system. Maybe you know about that and can elaborate on this. And this question is merely about programs and areas of studies that China is most interested in, and the priorities when it comes to research in humanities and social sciences, maybe. And also the next question is, how do China narrate the imperial past within historical studies, within historiography? And apart from the uniqueness you've mentioned before of the culture, how do they narrate maybe this cultural heritage you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation? And also I'm interested in this question precisely because of the popularity of the colonial narrative we have right now. And I'm just wondering, how do they kind of if they narrate this decolonial narrative and imperial past in combination with this nation state building, because it's very interesting tension I see there. And again, it's just, I'm interested in this instrumentalization of knowledge production and research, and maybe you can just, maybe you have comments on this. Thank you.
Okay, if I understand you correctly, the first question is about, how China can leverage or China interferes in our academic or especially social science and humanities. I think currently this is not a major problem for us. In the past few years, we do have scientists being co-opted by the Chinese authority. So one very important scientist in telecommunication was convinced and then moved to China carrying all his research data. So this was a serious blow for our information science. But when it comes to humanity and social science, I think we haven't seen much infiltration, because usually, for the past few decades, it is the Taiwanese scholars who claim that they understand China, the Chinese culture, Chinese history. And before Xi Jinping came to power, there have been many Taiwanese scholars conducting field research in China. So I think at that point of time, actually we kind of we have a say in studying China's society, history, and humanities, and not the other way around, because there have been few incentives for Chinese scholars to visit Taiwan and to conduct Taiwanese studies, because they don't see Taiwan studies as a unique and distinct field of study. Okay, so I think when it comes to social science and humanity, we haven't heard from public many worrying cases. What I do know is that in humanities, especially when it comes to like historical or anthropology, or any disciplines that requires field trips, we do have quite a few Taiwanese scholars visiting China, and there they could be co-opted because they have been treated very, very well by the local authorities there. Okay, so the Chinese government, local governments try to co-opt our scholars, and so when they come back, and they can bring those pro-China perspectives back to the campus. So this is the impact we see from cross-strait cultural and academic exchanges. And sorry, your second question is about.
I've been talking about and asking about imperial past and narrating the imperial past of China.
Yes. I think this is a dilemma for the Chinese government, because on the one hand, when contemporary Chinese artists, actors, or anyone in this Chinese cultural industry tries to make Chinese products, the imperial past provides the richest sources. Okay, so we've seen lots of TV dramas, televisions, even MVs that try to mobilize or to incorporate elements from the past, from the imperialist past. And this is a natural phenomenon. And so this is something the Chinese government has difficulty in stopping or in prohibiting. But on the other hand, when people became too obsessed with the imperial past, there was also a concern in the Chinese government, in the CCP, because they think that the imperial past contains several elements that are not healthy for the socialist system here. So a few years ago, China officially launched an order prohibiting cultural products to refers to the imperial past. And the reason was that those dramas, those novels, those writings could have negative impact on the people, especially on the younger generation, because when it comes to the past, usually the story or the narrative was about how people calculate, how people hurt each other in the royal family, for instance. And so I think this is a dilemma for the Chinese government. It wants to promote its own cultural industry, but on the other hand, it thinks that some of the past or some of the elements in the past doesn't or do not fit in its official ideology now. And so so far we don't see an overall strategy to tackle this problem. So I think Chinese government's response has been ad hoc. So at some point of time, it puts restricts on those cultural products, and at some point, it appears to be more liberal and tolerate this kind of products.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions from the participants? And well, if not, I'd like to use my privilege as a moderator and ask a brief question of my own. One of the things that we are trying to do with this course is to show the interconnectedness between what's going on here in Ukraine and in Europe with what's going on in other regions of the world. In the context of Chinese foreign policy and Chinese-Taiwanese relations, what's your perspective on the impact that the dynamics of the Russian-Ukrainian war and Ukrainian partners' support for Ukraine on the situation between China and Taiwan, and perhaps more widely in the Eastern Asia?
Okay, we can discuss this for hours, but let me just mention some of the most important and most commonly mentioned lessons we learned. The first, from the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think what happened here helped to shape our defense debate in Taiwan. As I mentioned, nowadays we decided that we need to develop both conventional warfighting capabilities and asymmetric capabilities. But this is not usual. This was not the case a few years back. So before Russia's invasion, then people in Taiwan were still debating which kind of capability was more important. But the first stage of Russia's invasion and your people's resistance helped us to settle the debate. So at that time, we acknowledged that the so-called asymmetric warfighting capabilities really was the key, and they will determine the future warfare. So that helped to resolve our debate. But as the war prolongs, it also had an impact on our debate, because then we came to acknowledge that asymmetric capability alone is not sufficient to push back the invaders. right? So you still need, I mean, just in Ukraine, you still need tanks, you still need fighter jets, you still need conventional or legacy platforms to push back the enemy. And so again, we also took the lesson. And so nowadays, that is why nowadays we accept that those capabilities are important. The issue is the ratio, but that is a matter that cannot be determined entirely by Taiwan, because we can only, I mean, we largely purchase our weaponries from the US. So in part, that also depends on what the US can sell, or the US wants to sell to Taiwan. So that is the first lesson. And I think the second important lesson is that when European colleagues come to visit Taiwan, nowadays a common question is what European powers like the UK, France, Germany can do in a cross-strait contingency. And to be honest, our answer is that if there is a war, if China invests Taiwan, then we don't expect much from the European countries, because you are too far away from us. And we haven't really had a chance to train with the European troops, right? So if there is an armed conflict in the Taiwan Strait, then even if there is some European military presence, we may not even know who is doing what and where. So we don't really expect European countries to play a very significant role when there is an armed conflict. So our suggestion to the European colleagues is that actually we want the European countries to do two things. The first, supporting Ukraine is helpful when it comes to supporting Taiwan, because China also watches closely how the war in Ukraine unfolds. So if the European countries can support Ukraine, China will take the lesson. China will know that democracies can and do unite to fight back invasion. So that is the first suggestion we make to the European countries. And second is that even though the role of the European countries could be limited in an armed conflict scenario, this doesn't mean that the European countries do not have a role in the peacetime or in the gray zone. So we make our suggestion to the European countries that actually we have a lot to talk and to work together, especially when it comes to, for instance, resilience. For instance, how to counter foreign interference, information or narrative warfare, and how to protect critical infrastructure like undersea cables, and so on and so forth. So I think this is also a key suggestion we make to the European countries.
Okay, it has been a really brief but quite comprehensive at the same time overview. So thank you very much for taking your time at this. It must already be quite a late hour where you are, right?
Yes, midnight.
Yes, yes, so we will not be holding you any longer. So thank you very much, and hope that you have a good night over there. And I would also like to wish a good evening to our participants and to thank them for participating. Next week, we are dedicating our Wednesday to Southeast Asia. So yeah, again, Dr. Lee, we are very grateful for your time and valuable insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you to meet you. And thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to meet you online.